Good morning. On behalf of Manitoba Agriculture and Resource Development, I would like to welcome everyone. My name is Leanne Sprung, and I'm pleased to chair the second of our two-part seminar series. We are so pleased to have nonprofit leaders with us today representing a variety of agriculture organizations and community groups. Our goal today is to help you advance your leadership skills and identify strategies you can apply within the nonprofit space. We hope this information will help your organization thrive. I would like to introduce our speaker, Patrick O'Reilly from Padraig Coaching and Consulting. Patrick is a certified executive coach. He specializes in helping those who lead others to excel in their role. Patrick has spoken to diverse audiences across Canada and around the world, from Iceland to Australia, Ghana to China. I'm confident this presentation will stimulate questions and encourage you to think about what you would do to become a great leader. Please use the question box feature on the right-hand panel, and we will respond to your questions following Patrick's presentation. Patrick, we thoroughly enjoyed your first session, and we are pleased to have you back to share your insights in leading others. Take it away, Patrick.
Thanks, Leanne. Good to be back. I appreciate the invitation. And thanks, everyone who's in the audience for joining us today. I'm looking forward to, I guess, chatting at you, since I don't have too much opportunity to hear from you, but we are going to use the Q&A box, like Leanne said. And by all means, please use that as much as you can and as much as you want, because that sort of feedback helps me know what's working and what's not, and we can adapt as we go. As always, if you've got a pen and paper, that's always great. I think make a few notes, and I know that Leanne are going to send out some information. We've got a little worksheet handout for you afterwards. Maybe just to make sure everyone's comfortable with the Q&A box, if you could just find that box on the side of your screen and quickly just type in, don't worry about typing a question, just type the town or the city that you're in, so I have some idea where everyone's coming from today. Oh, look at that, everyone's on top of it. Lots of Winnipeg, Verdun, Alexander, welcome. Morris, Dauphin, excellent. Brent, holy cow, look at this. People from all over the province, isn't that wonderful? Fantastic, that's great. Well, welcome everyone. I'm glad you were able to be here. And with the wonder of technology, we can all get together without having to travel. So that's excellent. Okay, for those of you who were here last week, you'll know that I've kind of I've gotten away from using PowerPoint. I'm not loving that because we all get sort of fatigued in these webinars. So I've switched to just talking at you, trying to talk directly to you as much as I can and engage with your questions. And then I'm going to occasionally hold up some cards to prompt you or to give you some thoughts. And so the first thing I want to ask you today to think about is, how focused do you want to be on the webinar today? So on a scale of 1 to 7, I'm sure you can see that, on a scale of 1 to 7, type in the Q&A box. And what I want to emphasize is, I don't mind whether you're a 1 or a 7, right? Just 1 is completely distracted. I've got the kids screaming and yelling. I've got some toast burning. I've got things going on. There's an Amazon guy at the door. And I just want you on in the background so I can have another adult in the room. Okay, whereas 7 is complete Zen-like. I'm hyper-focused. You're the only window on my screen. So, wow, okay, great. Lots of people sharing with us. So excellent. I asked that question because, not because I want you to be a certain place, but because I want you to be deliberate about it. You know, if it's a 1, that's okay, but make it a 1 consciously, because you know that's what you're going to do today. And if you want to be a 6 or a 7, then be really deliberate about that, about showing up that way. And to help you achieve that, I guess the next question I always ask in these webinars is, what's one thing that you could do to help you achieve the number you chose? So you don't have to tell me, but think about one thing that you might do that helps you get there. You know, for me, I am often distracted by email. It's kind of one of those things. And so when I'm on a webinar, I close my browser window with the email in it so that I don't see it anymore. And then I open it again after the webinar. Some folks say, you know, I'm putting my phone on silent, or I'm putting it in another room, or I'm putting a sign on the door for the kids saying, Mom or Dad's in a meeting, I'll be with you at 10, whatever works, or 10:30, I guess, whatever works, something that you can do to help you achieve the number that you've decided you want to achieve for today. And then one more thing, I know we've got an agenda that we've published, and we're going to cover that, but I would like to ask you in the Q&A, what would you like to get out of this webinar? What's something that you're here for, hoping that my talking today might give you some insight around? So if you can take a moment and jot in the Q&A, whatever you think you might like to get out of today. Connection and focus, excellent. Keep meetings calm, okay. That is intriguing. I kind of want to be able to ask more questions about what's going on in the meetings. Positive connections, great, keep them coming. And we'll dive into content and make sure I'm covering what you want. One or two takeaways on what I can start and or stop doing in my question asking. Oh, excellent, thanks, Megan. We will dive into some of that. It's one of my favorite topics, how to engage staff, how to build connections, lots of connection building. Excellent, okay, well that's great, because that sort of reaffirms what I'd planned. It's always easier if I'm not trying to do things on the fly. Okay, one of the topics then we talked about is how to build those connections, or we agreed we were going to talk about was build those connections and adapt sort of our leadership style. So, and frankly, this can apply even if you're not in a leadership role. It can apply to relationships with your council or with your board or with your peers or with your suppliers or your customers. Our approach at PADREG is often to help people be better leaders of other people in the workplace. So that's the angle I come from, but you can apply it however you like. And you know, one of the things that drives me is my realization quite some time ago, sort of after I finished in my own CEO roles, was that many of us tend to follow the golden rule in life in general, but particularly when we're leading others. Now, for anyone who's not familiar, the golden rule is kind of that treat others the way you want to be treated, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. There's dozens of versions of that in pretty much every language and every religion and every culture around the world. And frankly, you know, it seems like it would be very wise information. I'm willing to bet you probably learned it from your mom or your dad in the playground at some point about, you know, treating other kids the way you want them to treat you. And so it seems like good advice, but, you know, in a career, and particularly in a leadership career, it turns out it's not. And it took me, sadly, a long while in leadership roles to learn that. So I'm going to dive into a little bit of why and what that means. And I guess I should emphasize before I, you know, say throw out the golden rule, I'm not saying throw it out entirely, right? There are some basic situations, you know, I don't want someone to punch me in the nose, I'm not going to punch them in the nose, right? That certain playground rules kind of thing, they still apply. But it really doesn't work when you start to get into complicated adult relationships. And by trying to follow it, I find that most of us as leaders are making life difficult for ourselves, and in particular, making it difficult for our colleagues and our teams. And because of that, folks around us then tend to underperform. We tend to underperform. We're not succeeding in a way that, you know, we could if we could adapt this. And, you know, I get it. That sounds like a lot of negativity around something that literally is often called the golden rule. But I'm going to show you how to turn it around, hopefully this morning, and approach things a little differently. So just to give you a bit of background of how I came to realizing this painfully and slowly, is I was a senior executive in the federal government, the government of Canada, for many years. You know, I had some important roles. I had a lot of big teams, a lot of people reporting to me. I had domestic roles and international roles, and then I was privileged to be the chief federal negotiator to negotiate the creation for the Human Rights Museum here in Winnipeg, which is what brought me here about a dozen years ago, to be the first CEO of that institution. And so it was a Crown Corp, kind of like a government organization, big, lots of money, that sort of thing, but it was also like a startup. and adapting to all sorts of new people with talents and skills coming in from all over the world to join the team. And so I was applying the golden rule, sort of subconsciously, treating other people the way I would want to be treated. So you might think, well, what was the problem with that? How could that be a problem? Well, the problem was that the things that motivated me and that drove me and still do, frankly, because they're me, they're who I am. They were things like striving for perfection, needing to be knowledgeable and needing to be right, and needing to be seen as knowledgeable and seen as successful and looking smart, and most importantly, I guess, achieving big things. I was a big goal-driven achiever. And because of all that, frankly, through most of my life, I've been exceptionally hard on myself to achieve those goals and be all those things I thought people wanted me to be. And I simply assumed that everyone was motivated to be goal achieving, successful, meeting deadlines, pushing boundaries on new projects, all of those things. I figured, well, that's just what motivated people do. And of course, the problem is that I think most of us assume other people see the world the way we see it, right? I assumed people saw the world as challenges, as opportunities, as goals to be achieved, as progress to be made. And that assumption that other people are seeing the world the same way we are, it's so innately human, it's just so instinctual that most of us never, ever realize we're doing it. It's just sort of something that's so taken for granted. It's just part of how our brain operates. It's our psyche that we see something that looks difficult or frustrating or painful, and we assume that other people dealing with it feel that way too. And that's not always the way. And so, in my case, I had to, I was sort of spending my career trying to help, quote unquote, people be focused and driven and achieve perfection and meet deadlines and, make our bosses happy and ultimately just deliver the goods all the time. And that, as you can imagine, was stressing people out, wearing people down. It resonated with some, and others it made it really difficult. And when it made it difficult for them, frankly, it made it difficult for me because I was getting frustrated that it didn't seem to be making a difference for people. And that can and probably did lead to burnout and anger and frustration and being disillusioned that this organization isn't the one you wanted to be in, or disillusioned that the staff that you've hired aren't the go-getters in this case, or aren't the people you thought they were because you were hiring in your image. And so, yeah, it can turn out quite challenging. And so, it's probably obvious, I guess, why following the golden rule so succinctly wasn't working for me. I had to lighten up in my case with my personality. I had to stop assuming others saw the world the way I saw it. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So how in the world do you do that if, like I just said, it's so innately human that we don't even notice we're doing it? But it doesn't apply, and it doesn't apply just to sort of those motivated, driven, go-getter type A bosses. What if you're the sociable, outgoing type of leader? You love to build networks and bring people together. Or you might be a leader who's, very caring and you want everyone around you to feel cared for, and that you want to make sure that we're always taking time to make sure the people in the team and the group are comfortable. Or you might be a really detail-focused person, right? You wish that people could maybe just leave you alone so you could focus on getting things right, accurate, figuring out the details, articulating the processes, that sort of thing, right? Trying to prevent mistakes from being made. I'm guessing, I'm hoping that as I described that, that sociable, that caring, that detail-oriented, that goal-directed leader, that you're probably picturing someone in your mind. maybe yourself for one of those, maybe other people in your organization or in your bubble, your world, who's like that. You know, that social butterfly, that detail-oriented manager, that sort of thing. You know, when you just think about those things I just described, most of them seem like they could be naturally good characteristics. You know, who wouldn't want someone who's caring? Who wouldn't want someone who's social and outgoing? Who wouldn't want someone who gets the details right so mistakes are avoided? And you know, those may seem obvious, but each one of those characteristics, if they're taken too far, you know, if it's overly emphasized all the time, or if you're bringing those characteristics or that other person is bringing those characteristics in the wrong circumstances, then it can be difficult. Okay, things like if you're that caring person who wants to make sure that everyone feels comfortable and supported, you're probably not driven by urgency. And so at times where a deadline is looming and things have to move quickly, maybe continuing to emphasize that leadership style isn't going to be helpful in this moment, even though it's much appreciated most of the time. And so recognizing that, you know, when you're leading people, no matter what yourself, first of all, it's sort of figuring out what does come naturally. Are you that naturally caring person? Are you that natural social butterfly? Are you the detail person? That sort of thing. But recognizing that each of the people you're leading has some of those different characteristics as well that may not be the same as you. And so remembering that different people see the world differently, right? Combating that inherent approach we take. So, you know, just to illustrate, I think there's a cute example is one of the questions when we do a lot of one-on-one executive coaching and leadership coaching, and one of the questions that we ask people is, what do you love about your work, right? Trying to figure out who they are and how they approach life. And so we ask them, what do you love about your work? And the answer I get from a lot of them is, I love the constant change, never knowing what comes next. You know, I love that new challenge every day. Okay, fair enough. We hear that from a number of our leadership clients. And then we also ask folks, you know, what don't you like? What's the worst part of the job that you're in right now? And you know what we get as an answer from some folks? I hate the constant change. Never knowing what comes next. Oh, it's a new challenge every day. And that's, I'm not just making that up. We've heard that from senior leaders, literally the exact opposite. This is what brings me into work every day. This is what I love. And another leader, sometimes even in the same organization, saying, oh, this is the stuff that just wipes me out, wears me down. And so, you know, thinking about the fact, that's just one example, but thinking about the fact that the people around you fall into those different categories, right? You could have two people who answer opposite questions the same way. And so can you imagine, you know, one of the people who loves change, who thrives on new directions, trying to work with someone using that golden rule, someone who hates uncertainty, someone who's nervous about change. Those two folks are going to have a hard time getting along because they see the world so differently. You know, you can probably think of people, you know, in your workplace or on your board or whatever, who they speak the same language, they work together in the same workplace, but they just don't see the world the same way. They're motivated by different things. And so when those folks try to apply that golden rule, whether consciously or subconsciously, challenges just start to erupt, right? Think about, you know, if you're in an organization where, you know, you've got someone who's really sociable, outgoing, a real networker, really builds groups, you know, maybe someone in sales or someone who's just in a very outgoing role. And then you've got, you know, and I'm going to generalize here, but maybe you've got the IT guy, or you've got the research scientist who is sitting in the cubicle next to that person. And the IT guy or the scientist is really trying to get precise things accurate, is really working solo. You can imagine those two are going to frustrate each other because they just don't get motivated by the same things, right? So instead, those folks need to pick up on each other's cues. start to adapt to one another. And this is where I'm going to help you use those cues in your life, like I say, as a leader, but also in many other areas. Picking up on those cues is kind of the basis for what we call emotional intelligence, right? And being emotionally intelligent means picking up on cues, understanding where you're coming from, understanding what's driving you and motivating you in the moment, and more so than figuring out what's maybe driving, motivating other people in that moment so that you can understand the difference. And frankly, it's the opposite of treating people the same way you want to be treated. So there's many different ways to figure this out. We have an assessment tool we use in our company, and there are many different types of assessment tools out there, but you don't have to do an assessment tool to get a sense of where people are. You probably have to do one if you want to be really accurate, but to just sort of in your day-to-day figure out where people are coming from, we can do this. So there are things that you can do right now. I'm going to offer up a few suggestions on today's call, but by all means, you can dive into it more later, and happy to chat with you about that. But first and foremost, I guess, I'm going to bring another one of my cards up here, is to pay attention to each person individually. So that means not making assumptions about everyone on this team is this way, or anyone who's in that job title must be like this, but rather paying attention to them as a person and individually. Each person on your team can be different. So how do you do this? Then first of all, number one rule, start by asking questions. And I know we had a thought here about, I want to start and stop doing takeaways for asking questions. So we're going to dive into that in a bit. But number one, start asking questions. And what I mean by that is be infinitely curious about the people around you. And I found it's even helpful sometimes if you're just not an inherently curious person, you're not really too worried about where they're coming from, but you want to be or should be, then start in your head, the silent voice, saying, I'm really curious about, or I'd like to know more about, and then speak. So I'm really curious about, sort of forces you to ask a curious question. I'm really curious about what you thought of X, or what you're thinking about this new project, or what you're thinking about the deadline that's been assigned to us. If you ask a nice open-ended question like that, that's fed by you being curious, folks will tell you things that, hopefully they'll answer the question, but also you'll get some insight into where they're coming from. What do you think about that deadline? If the answer is, oh, yeah, no worries, I think we're going to do it, we can make this happen. Well, they're very comfortable with deadlines and change. Whereas if they say, I'm worried about how this team's going to take it, or I'm wondering how it's going to affect Sally, I know that she worries about these things, then you can tell they're paying a little more attention to the person than to the deadline and the project. Part of that, of course, is when you ask a question of people, is listen to the words they say, listen to their answer, and try and understand them, and also listen to their tone. And if you've got them on camera, or you happen to be socially distancing together, watch their body language as well. One of the things I think to keep in mind here is, see if I've got a card here for it. Yeah. So Stephen Covey is the guy who authored 7 Habits of Effective People, effective this, effective that. He's authored dozens of them, but one of his quotes that is absolutely one of my favorite things in the world to talk about. If you read our blog, you'll know I've brought it up several times over the last 8 years. He says, most people do not listen with the intention to understand. They listen with the intention to respond or to reply. And so what we're saying is we need to listen to understand. We need to shift away from figuring out how we're going to respond to this person to instead figuring out, how am I going to understand this person? So when you ask the open-ended question, it's not just asking better questions. The biggest gain comes from being a better listener to the answer. So that's a big part of how we do this. And if you're leading a team, or you're working with a whole board or something else, the other thing that ties in with what I was saying about treating each person individually is that idea of lead the whole team. If you're the lead of the organization, the lead of the marketing department or whatever, then lead the team, but engage with each person individually. Okay, recognize that you can't say, it's not accurate to say, my team likes this, my team doesn't like this. It's more accurate to say, these people on my team like this, and these people on my team don't like this. And if we fall into the thinking of my team does this, that, and we group people into sort of a homogenous group, then we're overlooking the people who aren't responding well to the way we treat the team. So let's take a moment and just, maybe for now, think about someone you'd like to have a better relationship with. So go ahead and think for a moment, whether they're your work or somewhere else. Think for a moment, imagine that person, maybe someone who frustrates you, maybe someone who scares you, maybe someone who just seems to push your buttons all the time. Okay, so think about who that person is, and then let's start thinking about their behaviors and start asking yourself some key questions. So one question I might ask you is, how quickly do they respond to a question? Do they tend to be methodical and contemplative, or do they jump right in? Do they answer right away? If you're struggling with them and they tend to be the methodical type in answering questions, then that's a cue for you to maybe slow down and engage a bit more in your approach with them. Whereas if they respond to answers quickly, always have an answer on hand, and they're sort of always ready to go to the next thing, and you're struggling with them, then maybe you need to bring a sense of urgency to how you engage with them. Okay. Another question you could ask yourself is, how explicit are they about recognizing how other people will be affected by something? So when you're talking about a project, do they tend to focus on the people working on the project, the people receiving the project, your customers, your staff, that sort of thing? Or do they focus on the project and getting it done and the deadlines and the goals? If they're goal driven, if they tend to be focused on the goals and you're struggling to work with them, then you might want to focus more on the goal when you're talking to them and less on the process, because they are really focused on just the end goal. Whereas if they're the type who are really people driven, and they often tend to bring up, well, what about so-and-so and how's this going to affect these people? Then asking them to share their concerns a bit more often when you're engaging with them will probably help improve the relationship. So you see what I'm doing here is we're trying to pick out the behavioral cues in the other people to then figure out, how do we adapt ourselves to build a better relationship? And in an ideal world, they do that too, and then we have really good relationships because everyone's working to adapt to the people around them. Another question you could think about is, how do they respond when there's a change of plans? Right? So you've got a meeting planned, by phone or something, or by Zoom at say 2 o'clock this afternoon, and then someone sends a message to the group and says, you know what, why don't we all have our lunch together over Zoom today and talk about it there? And other people are like, yeah, that'd be great, let's do that. Does the person you're struggling with, are they the type who would be freaked out or angry or crazy because of that? They were planning on the meeting at 2, they had this all figured out, they were preparing some notes for it, and now everything's changed. And of course, or are they the type who are like, yeah, that'd be great? Or are they the one leading the charge saying, yeah, what a great idea, I haven't seen you guys in so long? That gives you a sense of where they're at. And so it might mean, if they're more that sociable, like let's dive in, let's do it, and you're having a struggle with them, then maybe focusing less on details and facts and more on emotions. So the joy of things, the happiness of things, the struggles with things, but more on I feel rather than I think, might help work with them. I'll give you an example. We do a workshop with leaders about how to be better at leading their staff, and we asked them at one point in the workshop, what's one of the things you do to recognize people that's really good, that makes you a really good leader? And they have to give some thought and figure out what that is. And then we asked them something really different. really challenging. We say, and how might that thing you just came up with be demotivating to some people? It's a tough exercise, frankly, because it means looking at the world completely differently than you normally look at it. And so, we did this one time where a particularly strong leader, executive in an organization, actually here in Manitoba, said, I don't know that I can come up with something for this. My go-to recognition tool kind of applies to everyone. And her example was to recognize people publicly, to thank them for their good work. And she said, I don't see how that would be demotivating. And that's when, thankfully, a couple of her colleagues who were very different types than her saw the world differently than she said. With a little prompting, they offered up that public recognition embarrasses them. Being singled out unnecessarily is how they see it, and that they would much rather be recognized quietly and, more importantly, sincerely. They feel like a public recognition is a bit of grandstanding and doesn't really acknowledge the sincerity of the one-on-one thanks. And so that was an aha moment for her, where something that seems obvious, looking at the world a certain way, isn't at all the way some of her colleagues were looking at it. So that idea of adapting ourselves is number one for being a great leader. To go from being a good leader to a great leader is to adapt to the people around you. And to do that, start paying attention to the little behaviors, the little reactions. And just imagine if all of us were doing this, not just as leaders, but all of us working together. We're starting to adapt to each other. It would, frankly, I think it would be amazing. It's kind of what drives us in our leadership coaching and our leadership programs. And so, overall, I just leave this topic with saying that the golden rule is wrong. It's certainly counterintuitive. I think it sparks some people's attention, but I think it's the sort of counterintuitive thinking that's going to make not only your leadership better, your workplace better, but frankly could make the world a better place if we work at it. So hopefully that gave you some ideas around what to watch for and how to pick up on things. Another topic we said we were going to dive into today, which takes this kind of to an even deeper level, is having difficult conversations, whether it be with staff or your peers or your directors or the board or whomever. Having difficult conversations around performance in particular, or personality and how people are showing up, is frankly probably one of the hardest things to do. If I look at our clients around North America, this regularly comes up as that kind of situation, right? And yet, to be a great leader, you absolutely have to be able to do this. When we coach leaders in these situations, where someone isn't performing, or someone isn't achieving what they need to achieve, or they're disrupting the team, or they're not contributing, or whatever, we'll often ask the question of our client, well, what did they say when you raised it with them? And the answer is often, well, I haven't really said anything yet. Why? Well, the response that we get, and I'm wondering if you've ever had this feeling, is, I was hoping it would just go away, right? I was hoping it would just go away on its own. Maybe this will just clear up. How many of you have done that before? I know I've said to myself, ugh, I don't want to deal with this. And maybe it's not so bad. Maybe it'll just clear up on its own. Maybe they'll get it. Maybe this problem will solve itself and I won't have to embarrass them or me by having that conversation. And of course, if you've been there, you know that more often than not, it just gets worse. And then you start thinking, oh, is it too late to say something? I should have said something sooner. Now what? Now it's going to look like I've been bothered about this for months and I haven't said anything, when of course you have been bothered for months. So what if you look at it from the other side? Have you ever found out that someone was unhappy or disappointed with you after you'd been doing something or not doing something for ages, right? Maybe you heard it from someone else that so-and-so's unhappy about this, or you found out the person was unhappy with you when they finally, blew a gasket or said something at least. And how did you feel in that situation? right? That to find out after the fact that people in your organization were unhappy with something you were doing. That I've been there. That to me feels awful. And I've thought to myself, why didn't they just say something if they were unhappy? Why didn't they just say something if they thought this work was bad? And of course, the irony is I've also been that guy who's not said something because I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to be embarrassed. I don't want to hurt their feelings. I don't want to upset them. And so, you know, reminding myself of how I feel when I don't get that feedback, reminding myself that it can be a real gift to know early that something isn't working for someone rather than finding out after the fact has helped me get better at this. You know, it's helped me get around that idea of who am I to criticize? You know, because frankly, if you feel strongly about something that's going on, or if you feel like what someone's doing or not doing is bothering you, or not working for the organization, then in my opinion, you owe it to them to make it your business, to share with them, to prevent those hard feelings down the road and that awkwardness. Now, if you're not their boss, you're not in a position of authority, and you're thinking, it's who am I? It's not my role. You can always share feedback with the person, emphasizing that this is one perspective. This is the perspective you're feeling right now at this moment. It's not necessarily always the case, but that it's important, you felt, to share some feedback. Certainly, if you're managing them and helping them achieve and grow, and it's not just your opinion, then it's guidance that you need to share with them to help them. And how to have that difficult conversation there. Frankly, there are lots of models out there. Again, there's Fierce Conversations. That's a book written by Susan Scott, I think, Susan Scotty. There's Crucial Conversations. There's many others. We've created our own version at Padraig that we use that brings a bit of each of those in, because we didn't think any one of them was really had everything we wanted. So we took bits and pieces and combined them. And I'll share with you today, at least, what some of the fundamentals are. So first of all, is to prepare, but don't presume. Okay, what do I mean by that? I mean, you have to prepare for these conversations. I never recommend just wing it, just going cold. You have to do some preparation about what you're going to say and why you're going to say it. But don't let yourself go down the rabbit hole that's so common of presuming how they're going to respond, right? So prepare for how they might respond, but don't presume. Because when we do that, when we go in thinking, oh, they're going to hate this, or they're going to do this, or they're going to do that, we kind of make it happen because we're putting off those vibes, we're putting off that body language that we're expecting it. So instead, prepare for the possible outcomes, but don't presume them. The second fundamental thing we're trying to do with a difficult conversation, I like to call it interrogating reality, right? That sounds pretty intense, and it's meant to. I'm trying to provoke some thinking here. Interrogate reality means interrogate your reality and interrogate their reality. So ask some questions of yourself. Am I making presumptions about this? Do I think I know why they're doing something, rather than just observing that they are doing something? We can't read people's minds. We can only see their actions, right? So how much of this am I drawing conclusions, making assumptions about? And how much are they maybe doing it? What's their reality? What might they be driven by or thinking about that maybe you were wrong about, or maybe you didn't see the world that way, right? It comes back to remembering that different things motivate them than motivate you. Different things drive them and worry them than worry you. And so pausing before you go into this difficult conversation to interrogate that reality, right? Third is to remember that the goal of this conversation is in large part to provoke learning, okay? It's sure we want to solve a problem, but every conversation you have with someone is an opportunity to build the relationship, to strengthen the relationship. So if you go into this situation thinking, I'm right, they're wrong, and I need to change them, that's probably just going to damage the relationship. But if we go into it thinking, I want to provoke learning, I want to help them learn about where I stand on this and what they might be doing, and I want to provoke my own learning, well, why is it they're doing this? Where are they coming from on this? So I'm not going into it to think I'm right and they're wrong, but I'm instead going into it to learn more for each of us. The next fundamental principle I'd share with you is to use these conversations to tackle tough challenges, right? These are the conversations that probably don't happen often. And when they do, tackle the toughest challenge. Don't go into it thinking, oh, I'll mention one good thing, one bad thing, one good thing, and then we'll be done. No, this conversation's about the bad thing. This conversation's about the tough thing. And I want to learn more about it. I want to build a relationship with them while we figure out how we're going to fix this. Tackle the tough challenge. You will feel so much better afterwards if you do it. And if you're doing all those things, if you're seeking to learn, if you're seeking to raise the tough challenges, if you're looking to interrogate the reality of how you're seeing the world and how they're seeing the world, if you're prepared for the conversation, but you're not presuming things about the people, if you do all of that, then the ultimate ending is enriching relationships, right? This is, I think, number one. One of the things I like to say to people is that no matter what your job title, it doesn't matter if you're CEO, if you're operations clerk, if you're bus driver, it doesn't matter what your job title is, your real job is relationship manager, right? Whether you're anywhere in the organization, I don't care what your job title is, your job is relationship management. And particularly if you're in a leadership role, that's what you're here for, is to build relationships. So we're going to send you the model afterwards. So I don't want to give you cards on each one. I'm going to send it to you later. So just listen for a moment. The steps we go through to prepare for this conversation is, first of all, to think about what's the real issue and why is it important, right? What's if you can keep working till you get to the crux of what's the problem here for you, and what effect is it having? The problem is X and it's causing this. Okay, then thinking about what's your ideal outcome. So building a relationship might be an ideal outcome for sure. And on this problem, what's the ideal outcome for you? Doesn't mean it's the only outcome, okay? Don't fall into that trap of thinking there's a right way and a wrong way and my way is the right way. But what would be the ideal outcome from this conversation? Third is think about what's at stake for the other person and for you and for the organization, and being prepared to talk to them about what's at stake, right? This is a scary part, but you have to be willing to say, hey, this is causing a problem and this is what's at stake because of it. Another thing to think about before you have the conversation, part of that preparing phase, is how might you have contributed to this problem? You know, often one of the most obvious ones, first of all, is maybe I could have spoken up sooner, right? And maybe that's contributed to this because I've let it go on. So that, you know, is one obvious one. But maybe there's other things. Maybe when you stop to think about it, I've made some assumptions that I'm realizing might not be right. Right? So maybe I contributed to this. Next thing to think about is how will you acknowledge and demonstrate to them your desire to fix this, right? How do you help them understand that this conversation where you're telling them something that's difficult to hear and they might respond poorly to it, how do you build in an acknowledgement that you're here today, you're raising this today because you want to work through it with them and figure out a solution, okay? And it might be as simple as saying what I just said, right? I want to work through it to find a solution with you. Given, you know, what we just talked about a few moments ago about personality styles, behavior styles, and how different people see the world, this would be a fine time in the preparation for the difficult conversation, or what we call essential conversations. This would be a fine time to be thinking about, you know, do they think about people more than goals? Do they think about wins more than cohesion? Do they are they more sociable and outgoing, or are they more detail focused and a bit of a solo worker, that sort of thing. Give yourself some insight by thinking back about them so that you can adapt to how you're going to frame this conversation, right? If they're direct, if they're to the point, if they want to get things done, then coming into this conversation sort of throwing down some pillows, making it soft, doing ums and ahs and taking your time getting to the point is just going to frustrate that person. Whereas if they're a person who tends to focus on, doesn't like change, they like things to be stable, they like to make sure they're pleasing people, that people around them are content and comfortable, then getting right to the point and saying, hey, I've got a real problem with X, and here's what I think we need to do about it because it's causing this, that's going to shock their system, right? So in that case, then you take the opposite approach. You would take things slowly, ask, how they're feeling about this, checking in on their feelings throughout. So giving some thought to the first part of our conversation to then have that difficult conversation. Hopefully that gives you some insight. I've mentioned that Leanne and Leanne are going to send out, we've created, I think it's even a 4-page worksheet, little workbook for you that will take you through these steps that I've just talked about, remind you of what we're trying to achieve, take you through the steps, let you write out some thoughts before the conversation. And we've even thrown in there some of the common errors that people make when they're having a difficult or essential conversation so that you can think about that. And what I would encourage you to do is when you look at the possible errors, ask yourself, what's the most likely error for me? Some people might say that what I mentioned, I tend to throw down too many pillows to soften the blow. I help make it really comfortable and easy. And sometimes people don't actually even know what I was getting at because I put down so many buffers, right? Or maybe I tend to be the bull in the china shop. I just plow through and tell them what's wrong and expect them to do something about it. Okay, so then if that's your natural tendency, how can you adapt a bit to the people you're talking to? Okay, I'm giving you a lot of information today, and it's so hard on a webinar to know if I'm, overwhelming you with stuff. So I certainly hope I'm not. But I've got one more topic in the next 15 minutes we have before we open things up to questions. Leanne and Leanne asked me to talk about, the current reality we're in of leading remote teams, helping remote teams be successful. First and foremost, I would say everything we've talked about this morning, and for those of you who were with us last week, what we talked about last week, all of these tips and ideas and suggestions for how to be a better leader of people, they apply still when you're leading remotely. None of that has changed. What has changed is you probably have to do it twice as often as you were doing it in the office, right? So, or work twice as hard at it. And I apologize because I know you're all overwhelmed, just as everyone is. But if you're in a leadership role, my suggestion would be that during the pandemic or during the work from home period, that we as leaders need to shift even more than we did before away from doing work to managing the people who work, to supporting the people who do the work, to having one-on-one conversations, team conversations, to check-ins, to providing support. It's not an easy thing to hear. There's no easy solution to any of this work from home stuff, but if you're leading a team of people in an organization, if you haven't started it yet, trying very hard to move away from the doing, so a bit more delegating like we talked about last week, and then much more time spent supporting the people that you're leading. Because, well, first of all, well-being was starting to become a reality in a workplace. I think a lot of workplaces were starting to recognize people's well-being is so important. But, let's be honest, a lot of workplaces were giving lip service to it more than really doing anything about it. And the work from home and the whole pandemic and the constant uncertainty people are under has brought this to a realization and to a head like no other. And if you're in a leadership role, there's going to be a need for you to support people in that way and to support yourself. We'll get into that in a moment. So, number one is, I would say, doing all the stuff we've talked about already, but being more direct to ask people how they're doing. And then, like I said before, listening to understand. Don't feel you have to give them an answer when they say, I'm overwhelmed, I'm exhausted, my kids are wearing me down, whatever. You don't have to solve the problem, right? Don't feel like you need to answer. Instead, listen to understand. So if they're sharing that with me, that all these things are happening, I might just even start, my first question might just be, tell me more about that. What's it like? Get a sense of how is this affecting them? How is it affecting their world? And think about then, how must that be difficult showing up for work, right? So that you can build some empathy and get some understanding around them. If you ask them how things are going and you press a little on the answers, oh, good, or oh, it's fine, or oh, it's fine. Press them a little bit. And I don't mean, interrogate them, but press a little bit, asking them a bit more about what does fine look like for you? Fine for me might not be the same as fine for you. So what's happening for you? What does fine look like for you today? The next thing I would say is, again, I suggest all of these things no matter where you're leading people, but doubling down on them now when you're isolated from your colleagues is to coach them. So I don't mean go out and become an executive coach, but use some of our coaching techniques with them. And number one is to ask them questions, ask them open-ended questions. So by open-ended, I mean something that doesn't have a clear answer. So anything that's yes or no is a closed question. But other things like, what time did you get up this morning? Not that you'd ask them that, but what time you got up this morning? There's going to be a precise answer to that. Whereas an open-ended question would be, going out I don't know why I'm on that wake up this morning thing, but so you might ask your partner, your spouse, did you sleep well last night? That's yes or no, it's a closed question. But if you ask them, how did you sleep last night? That would be an open-ended question. So taking that to the workplace, you might say to someone, rather than ask them, are you managing okay at home? Yes or no. What's going well for you working from home right now? That's an open-ended question. We've no idea what their answer is going to be. What's going well for you? What's not going well for you with working at home right now? Another good one. So asking them those sort of questions, and when they come up with something, they say, oh, this isn't working well, resist the urge to fix it. Resist the urge to solve the problem. Particularly if you're in a leadership role, you are probably a problem-solving machine, right? You've probably spent a big part of your career solving problems for organizations, for individuals, for whomever, for clients. Now is the time to not be a problem-solving machine, but instead to ask more questions to help them get a deeper understanding of their situation, and they will ultimately figure things out by doing that, right? So help them peel back the layers of the onion. Don't just say, oh, well, here's what you should do. Okay, fight that urge to be the problem-solving machine, and instead be curious and ask some more open-ended questions. Generally, just having more conversation time, and I know you're busy, your schedule's full, and if you can delegate some of that, that would be good. And I get it, you're delegating to the people you're talking to, but you really do need to free up the time that you can be engaging with each of those people, and each of them can take a little bit off your plate so that you can engage with each of them and get a better sense of where they're at. So the other tip, that we found works really well, if you're meeting with your team by Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever the technology is you're using, use the breakout rooms frequently. People are engaging much more, enjoying the conversation much more, sharing much more when you do breakout rooms with smaller groups. So if you lead a team of 5 people, do a breakout room with 3 and 2. If you lead a big team, then do massive numbers of breakout groups. And when you do the breakout group, give them something to talk about. Ask them an open-ended question or give them a problem to think about, and they go away and talk about it. And I don't mean for a long time, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. but using more frequent breakout rooms is proving to our clients across North America to be working well for people being engaged, for people feeling connected to their colleagues, for people speaking up when they don't feel comfortable speaking up. Because work from home technology, one thing that's really become clear for us is it's even more difficult than in person for people who are maybe uncomfortable speaking up, or in particular, even people who would normally in a meeting be bold and speak up and give some suggestions right away, they're holding back a little more now because on Zoom or Teams or whatever, or GoToMeeting, you end up cutting each other off, right? Only one voice can get through at a time, whereas in a meeting, you can cut each other off in a polite way. I don't mean cut in the middle, but if three of you all start talking at once, it just isn't as awkward as three of you starting at once on Zoom. And so people are holding back because they don't want that awkward, uncomfortable feeling of interrupting and talking over people. The breakout rooms help with that. So use those. The other big thing I want to sort of leave you with today, if you're leading people, trying to successfully lead people who are working from home, is shifting in your own mind and maybe even on paper how you measure success, how you measure productivity. You know, so many of us have spent so much time expecting people to be at work from 9 to 5, right? They're working hard if they're here from 9 to 5. And really, that's never been a good measure of success, but it's what we've stuck to. It's what's built into union contracts. It's all of that sort of stuff. Instead, shifting to what do we need to achieve, and did we achieve it? What do you delegate to them? What did they work on? What projects were they contributing to, and are they getting there? And whether that takes them 6 hours in a day or 8 hours a day, and whether that time is in the morning or in the evening, should matter less. Now, I get it. People need to be together at a certain time so they can talk real time over technology. But that idea of, were they in the seat from 9 to 5? Did they give their 8 hours? That is, and like, I'm not criticizing. I've done the same thing, but for all of us, it is such an archaic way of looking at leadership. We have to instead figure out what people need to achieve and ask ourselves, are they achieving it, and help them achieve it. That's our role in supporting them, is to help them achieve it. So asking yourself, how do you measure productivity? And you maybe don't do it formally, but be honest with yourself. What do you think about people? When you look at folks in your organization, the ones you think are good and strong and capable, and maybe the ones you think aren't so much, what's driving that opinion? And does it need to shift to a different measure, particularly now that they're working from home? And the last little thing I'd say for helping the team succeed is celebrate more often. Even those of us who, you know, anyone who's like me who tends to just think, great, we got that done, excellent, the goal's achieved, let's get on to the next thing, let's keep achieving. We have to remind ourselves to celebrate much more often than we did maybe in person, because it keeps us together. It gives people a shared purpose, a shared meaning. And, you know, again, going back to what I said at the start, it doesn't mean highlighting Bob or Susie as the winner on this, they were great. If that's not what they appreciate, if it's what they appreciate, that might be great. But if it's not what they appreciate, not doing that, but rather celebrating what we achieved this week, or celebrating what we achieved on this project, or celebratory gatherings of other sorts that help people have something to look forward to, help people acknowledge the hard work that they're doing when they're trying to balance work from home. And then, you know, last but absolutely not the least, is to do a lot of checking in with yourself. How are you doing, right? Ask yourself those open-ended questions. What could be better? What is good? What do you appreciate? And give some actual thought to that. You know, we talked last week, for those of you who were here, I apologize for keep going back to that because I know you weren't all here, although I think the recording is going to be offered to all of you. But we talked about a hashtag we've got going around of take an hour. Take an hour every week and think. So think about where you want to go, think about where you've been. During that time, think about what do you need as a leader, particularly if you're a leader working from home. What do you need right now to feel better, to succeed more, to accept where you're at, to give yourself your own measures of success? Do you need to be kinder with yourself on how you're measuring your own success? You know, and then think about, how often do I need to check in with myself, and how often am I checking in with myself? You know, many of you, if you're leaders in an organization, you're probably driven, focused. You maybe aren't taking 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, a couple of times a day to say to yourself, how am I doing? What do I need right now? Have you separated your work and home lives, right? We're a year into this. If you haven't yet, I encourage you to figure out, how do you close up shop when you leave the office? Whether you work mornings and nights or you work through the day or whatever, how do you close up shop? Is, if everything's on the dining room table, do you have a box that things can be put in and a lid on and set aside? Is there a threshold you can walk across to say the day is done? So is that, you know, walking out of the guest room and closing the door, or stepping off the carpet that's in the dining room, or something that signifies that now I'm home again, right? Something that represents the commute you used to have, so that you can separate the work when you're home. You know, taking brain breaks, you know, checking in with yourself, like I said, some fresh air, especially now that the weather's getting better. You might not have done it when you were at the office, but you maybe need to do it now that you're working from home. Take a 5-minute walk around the block and just breathe in some different air, fresh air, before you come back to your desk. And as I mentioned before about how we measure productivity for people who are working with us, do it for yourself too. So don't limit yourself to a 9 to 5 or 8 to 4 or whatever your normal schedule would have been when you were commuting to work. Don't limit yourself to that schedule, but limit yourself to your 40 hours a week, right? So what I'm saying is, it doesn't have to be 9 to 5 Monday to Friday if you can make some flexibility, but don't let that become working day and night, working 7 days a week. Keep it to your 40 hours and then put the lid on the box. Close the guest room door. And the final thought I'd leave you with on that about, you know, leading others from home and what have you is, this is true of life, but I'm stating some obvious things here, but focus on what you can control, right? When something is wearing you down, it's worrying you, it's frustrating you, it's upsetting you, it's tiring you out, ask yourself what you can control and what you can't, right? And so for the things you can control, then control them. You know, put the boundary up, close the door, put the lid on the box, whatever. But for all the rest of that stuff that you realize this isn't in my control, then think about how you react to it. Okay, so control what you can control, and then control your reaction to the rest of it. You can't control how things come at you, but you can consciously think about, do I tend to get upset when that happens? Do I tend to get angry? Do I tend to get frustrated? Do I tend to work longer hours? Do I tend to take on more? In those situations, when the things that are wearing you down are things you can't completely control, then ask yourself, what's my normal reaction to it? And how could I react differently that might make it better for me? Might not change anything for anyone other than you, and that's good. That's okay. Okay, so think about how you react to it and whether a different reaction might help. So I see we're at 3 minutes after 10. I certainly feel like I've just been talking at myself for a long time now. So I'll invite Leanne to come back in and let me know if there's anything else you wanted covered, or if we want to open things up to questions.
Oh, thank you, Patrick. Oh, yes, thank you for providing a whole lot of important information this morning. thinking about the golden rule differently, having essential conversations, and leading via distance using technology. All topics that you've only been able to touch on a little bit this morning. I know individuals within organizations that are on the call and that will be listening to this recording, whether they're formal or informal leaders, whether they're in a non-for-profit or other paid work situation, will have heard much to think about and act on. I encourage people to either send us questions, Leanne Tibbetts or myself directly, or put them into the chat box. And I anticipate that there will be some questions, because I just, like, there's lots of things that my brain was just going with questions. Patrick will try to answer as many as possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
The first question that has come in is thinking about the essential conversations topic. If I have a staff member who doesn't, and in quotation marks it says, give the right answers to the questions I ask, and I think that means the answers that the asker would like to hear, and they don't seem to be getting it, how do I get the message across? So I'm attempting to get, be curious, but I'm maybe not asking the right questions.
Yeah, so it would be interesting to hear an example, but what I would say is generally, first of all, is don't be afraid to explain the conversation. So if you're having one of these difficult conversations with someone and it's just not working, they're not getting it, or they're not giving you the answers that to the questions you need answered, that sort of thing, then to pause that conversation for a moment with them and to explain what you're trying to achieve a bit more. It might be a question of, it's kind of that meta conversation of, here's, hey, Joe, I feel like we're not getting to what I need to get to. And so here's what I'm trying to achieve with our conversation today. I want to work on X. I feel that we need to come to a solution for Y or whatever, X. And it feels like we're going in circles, or it feels like we're not diving deep enough, or it feels like this is happening. What are your thoughts on that? Right? Sort of open up that, be clear about what we're trying to do, and then let yourself dive back into the subject matter when Joe starts to offer up his thoughts.
Excellent, thank you. That is one of the difficult things to do, is to be more direct, isn't it? Another question that has come in is, from your perspective, how important is it for new leaders? So thinking about chairs of not-for-profits, so every 2 years, for example, a new chairperson may come in, to build relationships and personal connections, or in some situations, reconnections with folks on the board or the staff. How important is it?
I think it's absolutely critical. It's absolutely essential, and not just for that situation, but any group or team who work together. So, if it's someone on a board, for example, maybe they're volunteer, maybe they only meet once in a while, it's particularly critical that they get to know each other. Because if we go back to that first part I was talking about, where I was focused on leading others, but it can be peer-to-peer, figuring out how people see the world, figuring out what motivates them and drives them, you're doing that so that you can have better relationships with them, and so that you can work better together because you've got a strong relationship. And if you don't reach out to people and you don't get an opportunity to get to know them that way, it's going to take a long time before you can understand where they're coming from, where some trust can be built up. So for sure, I emphasize that. Now, if the question was, how important is it that the board sort of gets to know all the staff, if there's an executive director or whatever, well, I do believe that hierarchy is important in organizations too. And so it's not that they shouldn't get to know the staff, but I'm talking about them getting to know each other as peers and getting to know the executive director and vice versa. I'm not talking about skipping over relationships or formalities.
Perfect. Okay. One of the comments that you may be able to read is that some of the things you suggest we know are good for us and others, but we still struggle to do them, even the relatively simple things. Why do we struggle to do what is good for us? And how can we move past that? I think everybody might be asking themselves that question.
Yeah, now there, if I had that answer when I have a thriving business, but no, actually I can dive into it a bit. You know, the things we know are good for us and we don't do, you know, right away I think of, oh yeah, the gym. um, uh, Even if they're simple things, we struggle to do them because there's something else that's pushing us away from them, something else that's demotivating us, or something else that's more enticing, right? And so asking yourself some of what is it that makes it unappealing to do that, or what is it that makes it appealing to do something different? If you can really take a moment and think about that, you'll probably, you know, these things are simple and the things that are working against them are simple, but we need to stop for a moment and ask ourselves, you know, having the difficult conversation with people, for example, often you dig into it. So why aren't you doing that? I'm afraid of their reaction. Okay, so then how can we work to prepare for that? What are you afraid is going to be the reaction, right? And so in that case, I mentioned earlier, you know, prepare but don't presume. So yeah, I'm afraid the reaction is going to be X. I'm not going to go into it. So I'm afraid they're going to lose their cool, or they're going to yell at me when I suggest this, or they're going to tell me it's none of my business, or whatever. Okay, so what would you do if that happened? How would you react? What would your next question be? What would your statement be? Try and jot that down in your plan. Those sort of things are what help us get there, right? So what's holding me back from going to the gym, for example? Well, it seems tiring and it's expensive, and I've bought memberships before and didn't use them. Okay, so I'm going to write all these reasons down, and then I'm going to figure out how I confront those reasons.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Eileen, for that question. What you suggested we do at the beginning, Patrick, I found very effective, and maybe that's a tool that could be implemented as, you know, what do you intend to get out of the session, and what's one action that will help you get there? That's a
That's a good point.
fairly simple tool that could be implemented, I think, for a lot of things that we are doing in our lives.
Yeah, good
Um,
catch.
Sue has a point. At what point do you know that you need to have the difficult conversation, and it's not just something that is a short-term issue and will go away on its own? Or is the fact that I'm asking this question answering it for me?
It is a little bit of that, Sue. It's that, uh, I guess, when have you had enough, right? Uh, when have you had enough, not of this person or this problem, but when have you had enough of letting this bother you? You know, sometimes folks will say, you know, we'll ask them, why aren't you having a conversation with that person about it? And like I said before, oh, I hope it'll go away. But sometimes they'll say, oh, I'm just, whatever, I'm not going to let it bother me. It's just how they are. I'll move on. And then we'll ask them to be honest with themselves. How easy is it going to be to let it go away? How likely are you actually letting it go? Right. So it's if you're thinking maybe this will clear up on its own, and you've thought that more than once, it's probably time, right? If it's something that's popping into your mind more than once, if it's something that's causing you frustration or anxiety or concern or disappointment more than once, then it's probably time to say something. That's an indication that this isn't a quick one-off, and remind yourself at that point that if I don't tackle this tough challenge today, it's going to be a tougher challenge tomorrow.
Great. Thank you for that. And thanks, Sue, for that question.
Mm-hmm.
After having the difficult conversation, do you recommend sending a follow-up email to confirm what was discussed or agreed on to try?
That one's sort of up to you, and I would suggest if you've got any HR advisor in your organization, ask them what they expect, because so let me back up. What I would emphasize is at the end of the conversation, you articulate your understanding of what's been agreed here and seek response from the other person that they agree that that's what's been decided here, right? That's important all the time, whether it's an essential conversation or a staff meeting. But always at the end of those essential conversations, state what you believe is the outcome, the understanding, and ask for their input or confirmation. So if that's the goal of the email, is to make sure we're clear on what was agreed, then I'd say do that in the meeting verbally, right? But your HR folks might say, we need this documented. And so then, you do the email as a kind of cover your butt follow up on this to say, this is what we did and this is what we discussed and this is what you agreed to. Why I'm hesitant on this is because I also want to emphasize that most organizations will have some sort of formal disciplinary process. You start with this, and then you move to this, and then you move to this, and ultimately the person is dismissed if things don't improve. I like to think of an essential conversation or a difficult conversation as before the disciplinary process. This is not a disciplinary conversation. This is a, hey, we got to work through something conversation. And so if documenting something in an email that then becomes part of the record is the start of a disciplinary process in your organization, then I would say, please don't do that with this, because this needs to be clear that this is you having a conversation with that other person to help them get back on track. It's not kicking off a different process. And I realize the disciplinary process is also to help them get on track, but it's got a different feel to it. So in an ideal world, I like the essential conversations to be before any of that. And so if documenting it starts that or looks like it starts that, then I wouldn't do it if you can avoid it. But if your HR folks say, no, once you start having that kind of conversation, we want it documented, well, then by all means, you follow their rules.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks,
just a
Elaine.
point that was a great point. Difficult conversations versus disciplinary.
Yeah.
Patrick, many organizations, especially small organizations that are not for profit, struggle to find board members in the first place. And so we often go to people that we know. We end up with people that look like us, sound like us, have the same thoughts as us. And there's just so many benefits of diversity, having different people on the board, but that can be very scary to be able to do that because of the fact that we don't know, we can't assume. And so what comments would you have to help boards ensure that they do have diverse thoughts and diverse opinions on the board, and that they can ensure some succession planning for leadership roles?
Big, good question.
Two questions maybe, but
yeah, but that's really important and really good. And so I would say, first of all, if you're asking yourself that question, good on you, congratulations, because that is the first step of realizing that you don't want a board who have groupthink. You don't want a board who all see the world the same way. So bravo for asking that. The next point I would say is be thinking about some of those examples of how different people approach life. So some people are driven and goal focused. Some people are more about camaraderie and teamwork and helping people along. Some are more about the social network engagement, sort of the more outgoing type. And then others are opposite of that, where they pay attention to details and processes and getting things right, even if we don't get them quickly. And they tend to be more focused on data and topics and details than they are on people. Think about those different characteristics and what you've got on your board, right? And so this is just another layer, because chances are, if you're trying to diversify your board, you're also looking at race and gender, and you're trying to look at language and life experience or work experience. And, do you need an accountant on the board? And do you need a grower or an industry representative on your board? That sort of thing. So I know there's already a lot of different things you're looking at. But when you decide that, yeah, we need an accountant, or we need a grower, or we need whomever, we need more women on our board, then start thinking about, and within that population, we should also think about the fact that our board tend to all be very people focused, and we tend not to be pushing the envelope very much. So maybe we need someone who's going to push us a bit. Or we tend to be really driven and we're wearing people out and we're exhausting people and we tend to always be seeking perfection, like be me. Then we need some folks who are going to help us remember the people and the impact and the teamwork and how we help bring people along with our fast moving goals. So I would layer it in as another part of your recruitment process. You know, if you've already got where you're recruiting an accountant or you're recruiting more women or whatever, then layer into that we also need to get more people who are focused on this, or more people who tend to approach life that way.
Excellent. So I have time for one more question, and then we will we'll ask a few questions of the audience. If you reflect back on your leadership experiences, and you shared a little bit at the beginning, if you could have done have one do-over or redo, how would you handle this situation now, or what different advice or choices would you make this time?
Yeah, you know, thanks for the question, whoever asked it. That for me, it is absolutely 100% drives me now. It's that idea of not assuming other people see the world the way I do, because I did that just inherently all the time. And it was so frustrating when other people weren't pushing as hard as I was, weren't trying to be better at things than we weren't trying to achieve goals. And, you know, it was after my last role before I started my own company, when I left as CEO of a Crown Corp, it was only after that that I realized we achieved a lot. We got a lot of things done. You know, my personality style got that organization to where it needed to be for a lot of things. And that personality style caused a lot of grief for people, caused a lot of employees anxiety and frustration, and in turn then caused me frustration and anxiety. And it was that realization that seems to me so obvious now, but so wasn't obvious to me when I was trying to get stuff done, that I wasn't seeing the world from their perspective. And if I had, I think we probably in the long run could have achieved more, even if in the short run some things wouldn't have gotten there the way I got them there. And so, you know, I'm not one who spends a lot of time sort of thinking of life's regrets, but if I think back over my career and if there was a regret that I could do over and change things, I think that would be it.
Oh, thank you for your vulnerability and your transparency in that response, Patrick. That's very helpful, and I think probably resonates with a few folks on the call today. I believe that you've inspired a number of organizations to consider alternatives and new approaches to develop their leadership skills and to become, go from good to great leaders. We recognize this session may only be a spark. The hard work really does begin now, and encourage folks to identify one or two things that we may not want to do differently and possibly seek out help to do so. Thanks for being with us today, Patrick.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
So I'll put my screen back on because we do want to thank everyone for taking time to join us for this Learn and Lead seminar hosted by our department, the Manitoba Agriculture and Resource Development. All registrants will receive an email with a copy of the recording and some follow-up information. Please help us now in the last couple of minutes we have to plan for future sessions by providing your feedback. And Lori will show some questions.
Okay, so I've launched a poll. First poll says, overall, how valuable did you find the content? So you can select one and click submit. We have questions. Oh, lots of people are voting. That's great. We'll leave it open for a couple more seconds here just to get everybody's vote in. So you can select one: poor, good, average, great, amazing. We've got lots of great information coming in. Okay, so I am going to close that poll and share the results. So we have 0% at poor, 8% good, 0% average, 58% great, and 33% amazing. So that's wonderful. All right, so we have a second poll, and it is, how will you use this information? So you can select one: I'm a board member or director. I'm a paid staff for a volunteer board. Career development, I work for business, government, etc. So you can choose one of those, please. We have a great response coming in. Thank you everyone for submitting your answers quickly.
We appreciate you may want to, you may have wanted to click more than one, but this gives us a little bit of a sense. Thanks.
True, and some may be sitting in a group watching on one screen as well. So a response is great. So right, so I'm going to launch those results. So we have, I'm a board member or director, 24%. I'm a paid staff for a volunteer board, 12%. And career development, I work for a business or government, etc., 64%. All right, everyone, so we have one more. Last one is future topics I'm interested in. Please select one: change management, planning for and holding AGMs, financial management and the board, succession planning and the board, or online facilitation, virtual meetings. So we've got lots of voting on that as well. So you'll just be able to select one here. Sorry about that. There's probably multiple you would prefer, but okay. So it looks like the voting has slowed down. And the results: change management, 25%, planning for and holding AGMs, 8%, financial management and the board, 21%, succession planning and the board, 8%, and online facilitation, virtual meetings, 38%. So thank you everyone for participating. And the screen is back to you, Leanne.
Thanks, Lori. And thank everyone for sharing your thoughts on how we did this morning or today and what else you would like to see. If you're looking for other governance or leadership information, please visit our website on the screen and click on Industry Leadership. Our team is available to assist and respond to your governance and leadership questions. And you can also contact us at the leadership@gov.mb.ca. Thank you for joining us and have a fabulous day.